All right, Exodus 20. Exodus 20. Let me remind you, because it's been a little while since we've been in Exodus, so just remind you quickly here. I mean, they've been through a lot. How has God, I mean, you tell me, let's see if you can remember. How has God revealed himself to the Israelites? How has he shown himself faithful in the book of Exodus so far? What do you think of? The deliverance, right? That's the big obvious one. I mean, they're in Egypt, they're stuck, they're enslaved, and God gets them out of there. He does something for them they could never do for themselves. Can you think of anything else? What else? Provisions. So they're hungry, they're thirsty, and he provides over and over again, doesn't he? Drinking water and quail and bread from heaven. So they're threatened by their human frailty, and they're in terrible conditions. They're wandering in the wilderness, and God provides for them to sustain them, to keep them alive. So he's shown himself in those ways. And in this section here in Exodus, especially chapter 19 and 20, it's interesting. God is showing himself with these powerful manifestations there in Sinai. They're at the mountain, and there's thunder, and there's lightning, and there's earthquakes, and there's trumpet blasts, and there's fire, and there's smoke. So all these very impressive natural or supernatural manifestations there to show them that God is with them and that he's the one who has done everything to this point. He's the one who's meeting with Moses there on the mountaintop. And in my mind, the way I'm understanding it, he's showing them, hey, look, I'm the real deal. You can trust me. I'm with you. I'm for you. And I'm incredibly powerful. And so you have these things. I was tempted to have Jack queue up, although I looked up some videos on YouTube, and it doesn't do it justice. But I was looking up some videos on thunder and lightning just to hear that crackling sound of the thunder and the lightning, just to be reminded how impressive it is. But it doesn't do it justice to look at it on a screen. But you know what it's like when it happens and your house shakes, right? I mean, it's that booming, thunderous sound is really impressive, and it makes you feel kind of small, doesn't it? And you see lightning bolts, and you're like, wow, that could do a lot of damage. I don't want to get hit by one of those. Earthquakes, and we know what earthquakes are capable of doing. Well, God used these manifestations of power to persuade them that he was with them, that he was trustworthy. It was one more way for God to show himself and say, hello, I'm here. You can trust me. But they didn't. Their tendency, like our tendency, is to mistrust him, to mischaracterize him. And so here we are in this section, chapter 20. He's just finished giving them the 10 Commandments, which, by the way, is another form of provision. If we had the food and the water and the protection and the liberation, it's all provision. And the 10 Commandments are a provision because they're articulating for people, hey, this is what life looks like. This is what relationship with your God looks like. This is what relationship with other people looks like. This is what love looks like. God is making it very clear to them. And then he has all these signs and wonders taking place right in that same context. So at the tail end of the 10 Commandments, which ends in verse 17, you have verse 18 that says this: all the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. Then they said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but let not God speak to us or we will die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. Let's stop there for a minute. Right away, it describes the phenomenon taking place there on the mountain. Again, that happened earlier too, and so God continues to display his power in this way. And it says, when they perceived it, they trembled. They were fearful, which makes perfect sense. If you're in a situation like that, and you're acquainted with how small you are and how fragile you are, you might be a little bit afraid. Makes sense. And they said to Moses, verse 19, this is where I want you to notice. This is where we see the misunderstanding, the mischaracterizing of God. Look what they said to Moses. Speak to us yourself, Moses, and we'll listen. But let not God speak to us, or we will, what? What's it say? We will die. If God talks to us, we're going to die. So think about that for a moment. Is God trying to kill him? We just talked about how he's proved himself faithful to rescue them, to provide for them, to sustain their lives, right? And here they are a few months into their journey in the wilderness, and they're like, don't let him talk to us, we'll die. Some ways understandable, especially when you think about the manifestations and everything that was going on there, but yet in terms of how they're understanding the heart of God, how are they understanding the heart of God? Apparently, it's not super clear that he's trustworthy. And this perplexed me a bit, but I think I'm understanding it now. Look how Moses responds. Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin." Some interesting observations here, just one verse. First of all, he says, don't be afraid. They were afraid. He just said they were trembling, filled with fear. He says, don't be afraid. But then ironically, or sort of paradoxically, he says, God came to test you in order that the fear of him may remain with you. And that word fear there is from the same Hebrew roots, the same idea. So it's in one sense him saying, don't be afraid. In another sense, he's saying, but God's doing this so that you'll be afraid. How do we understand that? Does God want you to be afraid of him or not? Yes or no? Well, it's kind of both. In one sense, no, in that he's revealing his heart. He's a redeemer. He's a loving provider. He's a father. You could say the Bible uses this metaphor too. He's a husband to the people. He's protecting them, taking care of them. So in one sense, he's saying don't fear in that, hey, I am your God. In fact, he's going to go into that just in a few verses about, hey, I'm your God. Don't craft images out of gold and silver. I'm your God. And yet he says he did this to test them, and that's kind of to prove out, to reveal what's inside of them. And in order that the fear of him may remain with them, depends on your translation, it may say before them. It's like God saying, but I do want you to know that I'm big and I'm powerful. That there is a royalty to God, a sovereignty to God. So I think he's saying in one sense, don't be afraid. Reflect on what's been done for you. Consider my heart. And on the other hand, he's saying, but remember how big I am and how powerful I am and how wise I am. So that what? So that you may not sin. And you know what you could substitute in that phrase for the term sin? So that you may not die. So that you may not die. The irony is, their interpretation is, well, he's out to get me. I mean, it sounds like the Garden of Eden. And it sounds like a lot of parts of my life. God, why would you do this or that? Or let me go through this or that thing over there or this bad thing that happened. Are you trying to kill me here? Go ahead, Sylvia. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the same word. And it's that idea of just seeing that God's big. That God knows and I don't. God's wise, I'm not. That's the beginning of wisdom, is knowing God's big, I'm small. Right? Yeah, for sure. So when he says here, so that you may not sin, I mean, we've just looked at these 10 commandments and we've spent weeks, 1 week on each commandment, and then we've had other messages where we've talked about them. I mean, everything from not having other gods before him, not engaging in idolatry, not taking his name in vain, the Sabbath day, honoring parents, don't steal, don't lie, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't covet. I mean, On and on. We've looked at these specifics, and there's a temptation here. This is really interesting. The word sin, so that you may not sin, is the word miss the mark, so that you might not miss. Well, miss what? Well, it's tempting to say, well, so that you might not fail to check the boxes given to you earlier in chapter 20, fail to check the commandment boxes. But I think what he's getting at here is he's putting himself, it's like, hey, you turn this way, here's God. That way, there's God. There's God. There's God. There's God. Like he's showing himself in so many ways. And he's like saying, look, don't miss me. Even in giving these commandments, it's him guiding them to life in himself. Saying, don't miss me. I remember growing up playing basketball, my dad had these expressions like if it didn't go well on the court, he would say, man, it seems like we as in our team or you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn tonight. Or you've heard this one, you couldn't throw it in the ocean. Like how hard is it to throw it in the ocean? It's pretty big. It's a way of saying like, look, how could you miss like it's right? But I could miss anything right now. Like, in one sense, we shouldn't be able to miss God. He's everywhere. He's created everything. He's the life giver. He's given us a revelation that makes sense of everything we experience. He's been kind to us. There's all sorts of ways that God has shown himself, and yet somehow, some way inside, we misunderstand, we misinterpret, we mistrust, we don't buy it. And God's saying, look, I'm doing all this so that you won't sin, so that you won't die. It says later in the Old Testament, the soul that sins, it will die. Once again, you go back to the garden. What is sin? When we miss God, when we walk away from God, when we reject God, what is that? It's death. Any one of them, to now talk about the violation of the Ten Commandments, the violation of any one of them, it amounts to death. Spiritual death, it's a manifestation of that. Oftentimes, with many of them, we talked about how there's the death penalty associated with the commandments. It's like God is, He is chasing us with life. And we are running the other way so often. There's a sense in which this is important to say that the Ten Commandments, let me read what Paul says. Paul says this. He's referring to the commandment about coveting, okay? This is fascinating. Paul says, this commandment, referring to the commandment, thou shalt not covet. This commandment, which was to result in life, proved to result in death for me. There's a sense in which the commandments result in death. Paul says elsewhere, the letter kills, the law kills. What Don was reading earlier about the precepts and the lines, there's a sense in which God uses that to kind of crush us. But to what end? Even that, it's like God does it because he's testing, he's proving, he's showing, he's revealing what's in us, that it is death, and even that is unto life, right? That's what his goal is to rescue us from death, to rescue us from ourselves. So while they see all this, they perceive the thunder and lightning and the trumpet and the mountain smoking, and they are trembling there, and they say, hey, you don't let God talk to us. Moses, you talk to us. You deal with him. We'll die. Such a good illustration of that mischaracterization of God. There's that, and then there's God saying, hey, look, through Moses, he's saying to them essentially, hey, I'm here for your good. What have I done that would justify mistrusting me? And so we think about aspects of our lives, and we all have them, areas where we question, we have a different way of viewing or want it a different way, and there's this authority issue. So here's a way of thinking about that. How many of you have coached or helped coach a sports team with little kids and had a kid that you've identified and you see their abilities, you see their size, you see their knowledge of the game a certain way, you have an assessment of them, and you say, okay, this is where they fit in our team, like they fit in this position. But that kid wants to be in a different position. How many of you have had experienced that? A few of you, I know. I mean, you've done some coaching. I mean, Don, have you ever experienced that with any of your kids? I mean, it seems like that's pretty common. I mean, I've experienced it a number of times. I can think of it a few years ago. I was helping to coach Jenna's team. There's a little girl on there, and it's like she was really good in the post position, down low, size-wise, the way she played, perfect for that position, but insisted on being a guard and kept begging us to, and had her mom involved, to get us to have her play guard, to dribble the ball up, but she wasn't a ball handler. And she didn't have the attributes that would be fitting for a ball handler, for a guard. But this is what she was all of, I don't know, 9, 8 maybe at the time, maybe younger. And there's that dynamic, and we see that type of thing, think how unfortunate, sad, or frustrating. We'll use the word frustrating from a coach's perspective. Think, gosh, you got to have this constant battle. Hey, look, I'm telling you, like, I've played this game a lot longer than you. Okay, if you want to play one-on-one, we can. I mean, we'll figure out that, hey, I got a little more knowledge than you do. Just trust me here. I'm in it for your best interest, for the team's best interest, but there's that inside, there's just that, no, I want it to be this way, right? So you know that kid, right? And I know none of you like that kid. And you are that kid. And I'm that kid. And God's the one who says, look, I know what I'm doing. What do you need? All right, I'll afflict Pharaoh this way and that way and the other way, and I'll do this miracle thing, and you'll get out there through the Red Sea, and you'll know, hey, you've seen my power. Now we're thirsty. All right, I'm going to provide water from this stream. Boom, you drink, good. All right, but now we're hungry. All right, bread from heaven. How about that? Yeah, but now there's this now. It's a little hot in here. Whatever. Thunder, lightning, earthquake. I mean, just the powerful manifestation. I'm your warrior God for you, protecting you, taking care of you. I've got you. I've got Giselle, you said earlier, I've got your back, right? I've got your back. Yeah, but I want to be in this position or in this place or have it that way or right? So the people stood at a distance, which again is kind of fitting language. It's like we just, like, all right, you can be over there, but I'm going to just stay over here. It's interesting. I was thinking about this. There's times in my life, I don't know if you feel this way. I'm guessing probably at least some of you have, where you've thought, if God would just, if he would just show up, reveal himself, if he would do, like, even if I could be, I don't know, we were at Mount Rainier recently. It's super cool just being there. But if you could be there and have some manifestation like this and have God's thunderous voice, hey, Jeff, just want you to know I'm here, like, that'd be cool, right? Especially when things are hard or frustrating or whatever, like, sit down and have a conversation. Hey, Jeff, where you at? What's going on? Like, to have a two-way conversation. Prayer is a one-way deal, right? If it's for you two-way, I don't want to know about it. But it would be awesome. And yet, here's what is fascinating, is God does continue to manifest these very same things, at least the natural phenomena of thunder, lightning, big impressive mountains that make you feel small, earthquakes, things like this. It's not an evidence problem, really. It's not an evidence problem for me, for you. It's a heart problem. And here's what God says. He says, I'm going to read to you in Hebrews. It says, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the world. And he's the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and he upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. The most clear, convincing expression of God's heart has happened thousands of years ago. We have Revelation that records it, and it tells us this is what God is like. He's a rescuer. He's a redeemer. He's for you. He's for you. He's for your life. He's for your life, not just physically, although he helps us in all sorts of ways physically, but he is for us spiritually. He is for us in relationship with him. He is for us to the degree that when Jesus comes, he embodies the fulfillment of these commandments. He lives as we ought to live. He dies in our place, the death we deserve to die. He does all this. Why? To impart life to us, to in a sense, there's a sense in which it's like he's forcibly giving himself to us. Even though our nature is bent the other direction, he comes and he comes and he comes and he comes and he comes. And he's made that clear, glaring manifestation of what he did for us on the cross, and all the scandals and all the nonsense that goes on. The evangelical and fundamentalists and other wider, broader Christian circles can't do anything to dismantle the cross. That's there. It's a historical fact. And God says, that's where I did for you what no one else could. And that's where you meet me as an individual. And we can't control the other people and what they do or don't do, but we have opportunities to be honest about who we are, what our need is, and how great our God is, and to see his glory in the face of Jesus, and to see that provision, and to see how clearly God has said to us, I am for your life. I've come to solve your missing the mark problem. You miss me, but I'm coming to give myself to you anyway. And there's a crucifixion, there's a death, there's a burial, there's a resurrection. It says that you are heirs of life, that you have God and you have life. And sometimes we're aware of it and we celebrate it and we have moments of clarity, and often those moments of clarity are in here when we're together and we're saying, wow, that's amazing. That message is amazing. God's heart is awesome. Wow, that's the God that I need. And there are moments like that, and then there are moments on, I don't know, Tuesday morning at 7:30 when you're getting up for work or whatever, and there's grumbling and complaining and ingratitude, and if only my kids would this, or my spouse would that, or the traffic were not this way, or whatever it is. And so we have this God who's relentlessly committed to showing himself, to displaying his heart, to revealing his power, specifically channeled through this redemption. It's pretty awesome thing. So we're going to pray, but any questions or any more thoughts? Or anything that Don said earlier that we just looked at in Exodus that fits together, that in your mind is encouraging? Or is it confusing in any way? Just take a couple minutes if you have anything. Crickets. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. And that's one of the things that Jill and I were talking about yesterday, is when things and everything else seems to be kind of crumbling around you, and the things that you didn't even realize that you gained some sense of security from, you didn't even know it until it's gone, until it crumbles. But what's really happening is God's acquainting you with what has always been true, which is that men are men are flesh, men are not trustworthy, but God is. And all, we say it, it's easy to say it, but hey, all we have is God. But it's really true. Like, you can't hold on to anything else. You can't control anybody else. You've all tried to do that in some type of relationship, romantic relationship, or other. You can't control people. You can't hold on to the stuff you've got. It rusts out, it gets stolen, you get in car accidents, and all sorts of stuff happens to damage what we have or to take away what we have. Came from dust, to dust will return. All we really have is God. And that's a statement of faith. We can't, there's no tangible, empirical sort of evidence of the fact that he is a substance that we have. But when we hear this message, it's like, hey, that's what I need. And that heart, if the heart of God is compelling, boy, that's the key right there. To see his heart on display and say, wow, that's a good God who is gracious and kind and puts up with my nonsense and my spoiled brat tendencies and loves me anyway and sees me like that little basketball player kid. Well, I want to play this position. I want to, and he just has mercy. It's pretty awesome, right? Yeah. Did you have your hand up? No? Anyone else? No? All right, let's pray. God, thank you for our time this morning. Thank you for the refreshment that we've enjoyed because of your truth. Thank you for what we're learning. And God, we put ourselves as individuals in your hands and our church in your hands and pray that we would, that you would guide us along and you would help us to see your hand and see your involvement and see you at work in so many areas of our lives, including and especially the areas of our discontentment, the areas where we feel like we've got to have more or something has to be different or so-and-so has to cooperate better or whatever it is. But help us to rest, God. Help us to cry uncle. Help us to allow your revelation of yourself through your word and through even our circumstances to bring us to that place of rest in you. So thank you again for this time. Thank you for everyone who's here and for what you're up to in their lives. In Christ's name, amen.